The hum of the Star Freighter's engines vibrated through the cockpit as Billy Bob lounged in his pilot's chair. His boots kicked up on the console. He chewed lazily on a toothpick. His weathered cowboy hat tipped just enough to shade his eyes from the blinking lights overhead. Outside, the vast stretch of space lay undisturbed, a quiet road on the galactic highway. His ship, the Express, wasn't pretty, but she was reliable, and that was all that mattered to a man making a living hauling cargo across the stars. The silence broke with a sharp crackle as the comm unit lit up. Incoming transmission from Galactic Freight Command, chimed the ship's AI in its overly polite tone. Billy Bob sighed, reaching over to slap the receive button. A flickered to life, revealing a dispatch officer with a tired face and a uniform. Billy Bob, we got an urgent job for you. Cargo, paying double the usual rate. Billy Bob straightened up, rubbing his stubbled chin. That's so? Double, huh? What's the catch? The dispatcher hesitated. The route passes through some territory. There's been pirate activity along the outer sectors, and we've already lost a couple of runs. We need someone who knows how to handle trouble. Billy Bob smirked and tipped his head back. Well now, if trouble's what you're worried about, you called the right fella. Patch me through the details, and I'll be on my way. A data packet downloaded to his console, and Billy Bob leaned in, studying the coordinates. A run to the Arcturus outpost, a station on the fringe of civilized space. He'd been there before, a rough place where the Galactic Union's laws barely held. But that also meant fewer regulations, which suited a man like him just fine. He keyed in the course and engaged the thrusters, the ship rumbling as it prepared for the jump to travel. The AI chimed again. Would you like to review emergency protocols for cargo transport? Billy Bob chuckled. Sweetheart, if things go south, I got 2 emergency protocols. Shoot first, shoot more later. As the Express entered FTL, Billy Bob settled back into his chair, tipping his hat down over his face. Another job, another haul. Just a simple cargo run, or so he thought. If he had known what was waiting for him on the other side of the jump, he might have thought twice about accepting that extra hazard fee. The Express dropped out of FTL with a lurch, the stabilizers groaning in protest. Billy Bob cracked one eye open and ticked his head back as the swirling colors of hyperspace faded into the cold, endless void. Ahead, the Arcturus outpost loomed like a rusted sentinel, its docking bays flickering with dim lights, barely holding on to what little power the station had left. This place was a long way from the polished, orderly trade hubs of the Galactic Union. Out here, you played by different rules. Billy Bob reached over to his comm panel and keyed in a landing request. Static filled the channel for a few seconds before a graph was answered. An identified freighter. State your business. Billy Bob rolled his toothpick to the other side of his mouth. Ain't an identified, partner. This here's the Express, bringing in a special delivery for Dock 9. Got clearance straight from Galactic Freight Command. There was a pause before the boss responded, sounding less than thrilled. Dock 9's full. You'll have to take Dock 13. Billy Bob frowned. Now, that don't sound right. My peepers say Dock 9. You sure you ain't just trying to make my life difficult? Silence. Then, Dock 9's full, the boss repeated, more forceful this time. Billy Bob drummed his fingers on the console. Something wasn't sitting right. Dock 9 was a secure bay, meant for cargo. If they were pushing him to Dock 13, it meant either they didn't want him anywhere near the secured section, or someone else was already there that shouldn't be. Either way, it smelled like trouble. With a sigh, he flipped a few switches and guided the third Dock 13, easing the ship into the gravity locks with practiced hands. The moment he caught the engines, the AI's sensors lit up. Captain, I am detecting unusual activity in the docking bay. Billy Bob unbuckled his harness and stood, stretching. Ain't that always the way? All right, sweetheart, keep an eye on things. I got a feeling we're about to make some new friends. Grabbing his plasma pistol from its holster on the wall, he thumbed the safety off and stepped toward the cargo ramp. It hissed open with a metallic groan, revealing the dimly lit dock. A handful of dockworkers loitered near some cargo crates, but they weren't paying attention to him. No, the real problem was the trio of armed men standing near the bay doors, their weapons just low enough to avoid suspicion, but ready enough to put holes in him if things went sideways. Billy Bob strolled down the ramp like he had all the time in the world, his boots echoing on the metal floor. He stopped a few feet from the men and gave them a lazy nod. Well, howdy, fellas. I get the feelin' y'all were someone else. One of them, a alien with sharp tusks and glowing red eyes, stepped forward. You're carrying the shipment from Galactic Freight. Billy Bob kept his posture relaxed, but his grip on his pistol tightened. Depends on who's asking. Far as I know, my cargo's supposed to go straight to the client, no middleman. The alien sneered, flashing his tusks. Consider us your new clients. Hand over the shipment, and you won't have any problems. Billy Bob sighed. See, that's where we got ourselves a dilemma. 'Cause if I start handing over cargo to every fella with a mean look and again, I'd be out of business real quick. The alien growled, his patience wearing thin. I don't think you understand. Billy Bob moved before the alien could finish, drawing his plasma pistol in a single, fluid motion. A sharp crack split the air as he fired, the shot slamming into the floor just inches from the alien's foot. The dockworkers scattered, some diving behind crates, others sprinting for cover. Billy Bob grinned, twirling his pistol once before leveling it straight at the alien's head. I understand just fine. Y'all were someone who scares easy. Bad news is, I ain't that someone. The other two men raised their weapons, but before they could fire, a new voice echoed through the dock. That's enough. A figure stepped out from the shadows, tall and cloaked, their face hidden behind a sleek, featureless mask. The alien and his goons stiffened but didn't lower their weapons. The masked figure's voice was calm, almost amused. Billy Bob, is it? I've heard about you. A stubborn old speaker with a reputation for trouble. Billy Bob tilted his head. And you are. The figure ignored the question and turned to the alien. Stand down. He's not the easy mark you thought he was. The alien hesitated, his frustration clear, but after a long moment, he grunted and gestured for his men to lower their weapons. Billy Bob, still aiming, let out a slow breath before finally holstering his pistol. The masked figure stepped closer, hands clasped behind their back. You have something valuable on your ship. Something certain parties are willing to kill for. Billy Bob chuckled. Ain't that always the case? The figure didn't respond, only tilted their head slightly. If you want to make it out of here in one piece, I suggest you listen very carefully. Billy Bob crossed his arms, his easygoing smirk never fading. Well now, partner, you got my attention. The Express tore through the ward at full burn, its thrusters blazing bright against the darkness of space. Billy Bob gritted his teeth as the ship jolted from another impact, the shields barely holding against the relentless pursuit of the bounty hunter's hot on his tail. The targeting alarm blared across the cockpit, warning of another incoming missile lock. He slammed the override, forcing a sudden lateral roll that sent the ship spiraling just as the missile streaked past, exploding harmlessly in the distance. His AI, sweetheart, chimed in with her usual dry tone. Captain, I'd like to remind you that engaging in combat maneuvers in a ship held together by duct tape and prayers is statistically unwise. Billy Bob barked a laugh, hands flying across the controls. Well, darling, it's either that or get turned into space dust, and I don't much fancy being dust today. He yanked the throttle back, cutting speed just enough to let one of the pursuers shoot past him, giving him a perfect angle. His fingers danced over the weapon's console, unleashing a barrage of plasma fire that tore through the smaller fighter, sending it spinning into the abyss. The calm crackled to life, and an angry voice filled the cockpit. You're making this real difficult, tracker. Hand over the cargo, and we'll let you limp away. Billy Bob smirked and flicked the calm switch. Yeah, see, the thing is, I don't much like being told what to do. And I sure as hell ain't handin' over nothin' to a pack of who can't even shoot straight. He caught the transmission before the bounty hunter could respond, then braced himself as another impact rocked the ship. Sweetheart's voice came through again, this time with an edge of urgency. Shields at 12%. Structural integrity is beginning to show strain. I recommend immediate evasive action. Billy Bob muttered a curse under his breath. These boys weren't giving up easy. He needed an escape plan, and he needed one fast. His eyes flicked over the NOV readout, searching for any nearby objects, an asteroid field, a nebula, anything he could use. Then he saw it, an old refueling station floating just outside a dead zone of space, its power signatures barely registering. It was abandoned, but it still had enough mass to provide cover. He slammed the throttle forward, making a break for it. Sweetheart, prep the decoys and get ready to kill the lights. As the bounty hunters closed in, Billy Bob activated the emergency countermeasures. A series of false signatures erupted in all directions, creating a swarm of ghost targets on enemy scanners. At the same time, he cut all power, making the ship appear as nothing more than another piece of drifting debris. The plan worked, mostly. One of the bounty hunters veered off, fooled by the decoys, but the lead ship stayed locked onto him. The hunter was experienced, not easily tricked. Billy Bob could almost respect the persistence. With no other options, he took a risk and aimed straight for the refueling station. The hull groaned as he pushed the engines to their limit, diving toward the derelict structure. The bounty hunter followed, weapons blazing. Plasma rounds tore through the station's exterior, sending debris flying in all directions. Billy Bob weaved through the wreckage, using the floating meta to break line of sight. The bounty hunter wasn't as lucky. A large piece of wreckage clipped the pursuer's wing, sending their ship spinning out of control. Billy Bob didn't wait to see the aftermath. He punched the throttle and shot out the other side of the station, clearing the danger zone just as the enemy ship smashed into the remains of an old fuel tank. A massive explosion lit up the darkness, and the shockwave sent the shaking, but she held together. Billy Bob let out a long breath, rubbing a hand over his face as he finally allowed himself to relax. Sweetheart, how we lookin'? Shields are non-existent, and hull integrity is at %. Minor damage to the rear thrusters, but we are still operational. He let out a low whistle. Ain't nothin' a little duct tape won't fix. Sweetheart didn't dignify that with a response. With the immediate danger behind him, Billy Bob set a new course, angling away from the wreckage. He wasn't out of the woods yet. Whoever had put that bounty on him wasn't gonna stop just because a few hired guns failed. He needed to figure out who was after him and why. Leaning back in his seat, he sighed. Guess it's time to pay an old friend a visit. He keyed in new coordinates, locked the on course, and let the stars blur past as he made his way toward the next chapter of trouble. The express touched down on a dusty moon, its engines hissing as they cooled from the rough landing. Billy Bob himself from the pilot's chair and stretched, rolling his shoulders before grabbing his sidearm and stuffing it into his holster. The place was a backwater pit, the kind of place where people asked no questions and expected none in return. That made it the perfect spot for a man on the run to get some answers. Sweetheart's voice crackled through the calm. Captain, I must once again remind you that this location has a statistically high probability of leading to your untimely demise. Billy Bob smirked. Now, sweetheart, where's the fun in living if you don't take a few risks? He pulled on his jacket and stepped down the ship's ramp, his boots kicking up little clouds of moon dust as he walked toward the settlement ahead. The place was barely more than a ramshackle collection of buildings, illuminated by flickering neon signs that had seen better days. He made his way to the biggest structure in town, a seedy bar with a crack that read the Last Stop. The moment he stepped inside, the smell of cheap liquor, engine grease, and bad decisions hit him like a freight hauler. The patrons were the usual crowd: mercenaries, smugglers, and people who didn't want to be found. He fit right in. As he walked toward the bar, a few heads turned his way, but no one made a move. That was good. That meant they either didn't recognize him or didn't care. He leaned against the counter and tapped the bar twice. Whiskey if you got it. Something close if you don't. The bartender, a grizzled old alien with 4 eyes and a cybernetic arm, grunted before pouring a shot of something amber into a dented metacup. Billy Bob took a sip, winced, and let out a low whistle. Hell, that's got a kick. A deep voice rumbled behind him. Tracker. Billy Bob didn't turn around right away. He knew that was. Instead, he took another sip, savoring the moment. He said, finally glancing over his shoulder. The massive reptilian bounty hunter loomed behind him, arms crossed, his black combat armor scuffed and dented from years of work. You've been busy, growled. Word is, you made a whole lot of people real angry. Billy Bob sighed and swirled the liquor in his cup. Yeah, well, that tends to happen when people try to shoot me. He finally turned to face the bounty hunter fully, giving him an easy grin. So what's the price on my head these days? Eyes narrowed. Enough that a lot of fools are willing to die trying to collect. Billy Bob set his cup down and leaned on the bar. And you here to collect. The bounty hunter let out a low chuckle. If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have made it through the day or. Billy Bob nodded. That was fair. Then I'm guessing you got something I need to hear. Expression didn't change. You made a mistake, Tracker. This ain't just some cargo job gone wrong. Someone powerful put that bounty on you, and they're not gonna stop sending people after you until you're dead. Billy Bob's easy grin faded just a little. You got a name. Hesitated for a moment, then leaned in. The Syndicate. Billy Bob cursed under his breath. Of all the people he could have pissed off, it had to be them. The Syndicate was more than just criminals. They were an empire of corruption, controlling trade, politics, and entire planetary systems. If they wanted him dead, he wasn't going to be able to outrun them forever. He ran a hand through his hair and exhaled. That's bad. Granted. Very. Billy Bob drummed his fingers against the counter. Any idea why they want me? The bounty hunter shook his head. I just know the contract's real personal. Somebody high up wants you buried. Billy Bob's mind raced. He thought back to all the jobs he'd run recently, the cargo he'd hauled. Was it the shipment of weapons he'd smuggled past Beorden Patrol? The passenger he'd transported and false credentials? Or maybe, his eyes widened as realization hit him. Son of a, he rubbed his face. It's about the cargo. Tilted his head. You stole from them. Billy Bob groaned. Not on purpose. I took a contract through a broker. Paid in advance, no questions asked. Turns out, the cargo wasn't just some gadgets, it was a damn Syndicate data vault. Let out a low whistle. That's a death sentence. Billy Bob nodded. Yeah, I'm started to see that. He downed the rest of his drink and set the cup aside. Well, guess that means I gotta return it before they send someone meaner than you. Lips curled in something almost like amusement. You won't make it past the next jump without a plan. Billy Bob grinned. Lucky for me, I always got a plan. Just gotta improvise it as I go. He pushed off the bar and adjusted his jacket. Sweetheart, warm up the engines. We're about to make a real bad decision. The AI's voice came through his earpiece. I assume that means we are leaving this establishment with minimal property damage. Billy Bob chuckled. No promises. As he turned to leave, called after him. Tracker. Billy Bob glanced back. The bounty hunter's expression was unreadable. You get one chance to fix this. If you fail, I won't be the only one coming after you. Billy Bob gave him a lazy salute. Appreciate the partner. Then he stepped out into the night, the weight of the galaxy suddenly a whole lot heavier on his shoulders.